I do need to take this off because I feel like I need to shout. I am recruiting working on my toaster.
Nice.
I still remember the very first time I walked into the road. And that was not the first time that I'd been in a lesbian queer girl bar, because in Tallahassee, we had a women's bookstore. And then at the women's bookstore, you could read about all the various groups that you could come to and attend. It was called Ruby Fruit Bookstore. So back to the Wild Rose. So I walked in and just waited. But yeah, that was my first experience. So I have always personally felt like I have identified more and felt more connections with gay men. The ease in which gay men approach casual sex, it's beautiful. And I'm not saying it's emotionless sex that I'm talking about, but you know.
Like a hookup.
Yes. Like to just have your sexuality and enjoy cheap, raw, in the moment sex, and then handshake and
be on your way.
Nice to know ya. You know, and there's a lot of processing, like ad nauseum. And this is where I talk out of the other side of my face. When I am in a relationship, I'm in a relationship. I try to walk an extremely ethical line when it comes to other people's feelings. If it comes to my awareness, whether they're aware of it yet or not, and that if they have developed feelings, I believe that it is my responsibility to stop. No matter what that person says, my perpetuating the relationship from that moment forward is feeding into and perpetuating the feelings and hopes and aspirations that person may have. If somebody is gonna let you be a doormat to them and let you treat them like shit, you're still a fucking asshole for doormatting on them and treating another human being like shit.
Nice.
I'm putting my earrings in.
Yeah, this is a very sophisticated show. So I hope, yeah.
Well, I saw your necklace, actually. That's what cued me in. Do you know that those questions stay in my drawer the whole time?
And what a better place to be. Yeah, they were a lot of them.
You're there. Look at my handwriting. Here's one. Do you know what? If we had actually followed through with this, we would have so much money right now, because so many of these games were literally made right after we came up with this idea.
So you're responsible for the site, My You Big Talker, which was kind of about like at Big Talk and asking questions that are more interesting than the weather. We started coming up with questions, and most of them, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 75% had to do with relationship issues, including things like, if your partner became incontinent, would you stay with them? But that's how the game started, right?
That is how the game started.
Did you watch the town hall last night?
No, you know what, I gotta tell you, Bears Breaking In is an awesome YouTube search for watch it. There actually is Bears Breaking In. It's a theme.
This person was the one responsible for the squirrels yawning tip in another video.
What do you think people should learn in civics? They have a responsibility, and they have a responsibility to understand how their government works. 3 branches of government, separation of power. What's that about? You know, show some curiosity. My pet peeve are the complainers. Complain and don't vote.
Why do you think they don't vote?
In great part because they're lazy. I don't think it's this like, oh, I can't, you know, I don't even think that they have enough to be saying that they're not voting on principle. So Shaquille O'Neal is the one who just came out with, you know, saying that he just voted for the first time in his life. And he's not young. And he said, I really didn't think that my vote counted because I didn't understand the Electoral College. And I now understand the Electoral College, because he was shocked to understand how it is that Trump won. There needs to be acknowledgement that white people have a different reason for not voting than Black people. Black people have different reasons for not feeling like their vote doesn't matter. If I'm going to say that people don't vote because they're lazy, I need to be clear that I'm talking about white people. Way more marginalized and disenfranchised populations in this country have different reasons to not vote. I won't say they're good reasons. I understand. Their vote counts. Their vote is extremely important.
I think it was the first episode I did. I've only had 2. I was talking about shame, but it was relating to wearing masks and how it didn't work to shame people into wearing them. You had made the point that sometimes, shame can be helpful.
I think in a world where no one feels any shame for their bad behavior is not a world in which I want to live. I shamed a pool full of probably college-age boys in Mexico. I started noticing that they were noticing my guy friends who were couples, and were acting like couples, not salacious couples, but just your, classic, normal,
loving couple.
My girlfriend at the time had swam over to the pool bar, so was kind of in front of them to order drinks for us. I'm watching them laugh at her because she's in a one-piece women's bathing suit, but she physically presents as more masculine. Naturally also has, a little facial hair. She chose to live in her body and be herself and be comfortable.
As all men do.
Yeah, exactly. One of them said, and they all concurred, that she should just choose. And that set me off. So I go over and as I approach, I say loudly, "Oh, does she? She needs to choose, does she?" And they all like, "We didn't know. We just didn't understand." And I say, "You should never make fun of something then that you don't understand. Educate yourself and learn about it, but don't make fun of it." And then I did the shame on you, shame on you, shame on all of you. Then the nerve of the punk with the aviator glasses gets from the bar and actually kind of comes over and says, "Hey, listen, we're all just trying to relax here. Like, I'm the nuisance. And I say, "Relax? Really? Do you think it's very relaxing for all of us to be here in this pool listening to that? It's not. It's not relaxing at all. So you can go back to the bar and sit down and relax." And he had nothing to say. He backs away. And then a guy and a girl came into the pool and approached us, and he's putting his hand out and he's like, "I just want to apologize. I'm really sorry." And I said, "You know what? I don't need to shake your hand and I don't need to accept your apology. Just learn from this moment and be a better person." And here's the great thing, Lenny. For the next 2 days, not one of them were allowed to be back in the pool.
I mean, you put a mirror up and reflected at them.
Yeah. And they did feel shame.
Yeah, the unkindness of their behavior. And so if we're talking about something like masks and you see somebody out wearing masks, and if we were to say to these people, "Shame on you," that wouldn't necessarily work.
Right. No, you're right.
But if we pulled them aside, in some way and just said, "I had somebody really close to me die because, or whatever," just like had a real conversation about it, that they would still feel the shame, but it wouldn't be like a defensive way or something.
But what you're saying, and I agree, is that a disproportionate amount of shame elicits the defense mechanism of feeling like a bad person. And when that defense mechanism kicks in, then you lose your audience. Do you
have the game questions in front of you?
Here's your writing. Here's my writing on the other side. I'm gonna randomly reach into this little pocket. It says copyright Olivia and Karen. It says the death penalty, then it says drowning, falling off cliff, lying on ice till you die.
What's one more question in there?
This is my digging face.
Yes.
Oh, that's really funny. Ask your own question. I'm gonna go in one more time. If you wrote a goodbye letter, i.e. suicide, in parentheses, what would you say? It's my handwriting this time. This is really funny. If your non-vegetarian friends believed the free-range chicken they ate was, in all capitals, free, would you tell them otherwise? Oh, God, that's good.
Still feeling a little neglected by the vegan activists who didn't quite do their job. There was sort of the betrayal question, which wasn't a betrayal until it was answered, which was, who would you call if the airplane was going down? And of course, my name was never mentioned on any answers of anybody. I remember somebody put your name. But you would be a very good airplane call.
Oh, I do crisis calls good.
Yeah, my thought was that there should be more social work responses versus police responses to these calls.
One thing I've heard is take money from law enforcement and have social workers go to the crisis calls at the house, right? And this is about where you have a parent calling saying, my adult son got a knife, and then they end up getting shot. And the parent, of course, wants to stab themselves for even involving the law enforcement who they called to help their son, who just came and shot their son to death. And this happened actually here in Shoreline years ago. And that was one of the incidences that was a part of the conversation of creating a whole new training for police so that they're specialized police officers who know how to handle like mental health crises and that sort of thing. It hasn't been, a huge success because they're police officers. I mean, and they chose that field for a reason. And I didn't choose that field for a reason. I think that we do need law enforcement. I've had my house broken into many times. I know people who've been physically attacked. Who else is going to come help you with that shit, right? But back to defund refund. I don't think that it's fully accurate to say that you can take money from law enforcement and give it to social workers to go to respond, go driving and dealing with all this. Because here's the thing, even with the homeless population here and the homeless camps, they're like, we don't need cops doing that. We got to have social workers going and doing that. And I'm calling bullshit on that. Social workers call police to do standby when they go do that stuff every time, period. So when you say that you're going to take money away and have social workers go do it, as if all of a sudden police aren't involved, it's not accurate.
So it needs to be like a Miami Vice team of a social worker and a cop?
It needs to be a team. I mean, I'm just super frustrated with our government, local government here. A perfect example, the first Black woman to be the chief of Seattle Police Department is gone.
Didn't she quit or something?
She quit because the city council, in their emotional response while CHOP was still up, was to cut her salary. After she quit, the local Black Lives Matter were like, what the fuck are you people doing? You just ran out the first Black woman to be, who could, of all the people you want in that position to kind of lead through change, is a woman, and you really want a Black woman in that position. Mm-hmm. Her perspective is extremely important and extremely unique.
I think when we last talked, you kind of expanded the way I was thinking about homelessness too, because it's that conversation that we've been having around race where, there's not one representative person for a population, right? There's and so homelessness means a lot of different things. Somebody, just getting by living in their car, or like in Silicon Valley where people live in their van because they can't afford the rent. That's exactly. A different homelessness than somebody who's, addicted to drugs or, or has mental health issues.
Florida is more kind and does a better job.
Wow, your home state.
People who have chronic mental illness than the state of Washington. Here in the state of Washington, if you are a counselor, a therapist, or a psychiatrist even, or just, clinical case manager, you're working with this person for maybe a year, right? You see them every week. You know this person really well. You know when they're decompensating, and you know when to kind of step in and go, whoa, we need to pull this back before it gets to the point where you're going to stop living in your apartment and not be there. And in Florida, how it would work is I would go to the psychiatrist and I would say, hey, Jane is not doing well. I'm really worried. Then I'd walk Jane into the psychiatrist's office, who would then evaluate right then and be like, oh, Jane, honey, you need to go to the hospital next door. And then I'd walk Jane next door to the hospital, and then Jane would get her medication stabilized and she'd come out. Fucking beautiful. Here, no, I have to call an MHP who's a total stranger who just works in the community. They're King County mental health professionals are now called designated crisis responders, DCRs. And I have to say, hey, my client of a year is decompensating, needs to be inpatient hospitalized, and I need to get this MHP to evaluate my client and approve that. And so if the MHP who has never met my client once in their whole life determines that my client doesn't really meet that threshold, then they're not going to go to inpatient treatment. The level threshold is so high. When you have a child who turns 13 in the state of Washington, if they become mentally ill and they need inpatient treatment, unless they are approved by a DCR, they won't. So you as a parent lose your ability to actually take your kid to the hospital and say, my kid's like off the hook or is doing meth or is doing heroin. I need them inpatient so that they don't die. And here in Washington, only if the kid agrees. Here is where the laws in the state of Washington are completely in conflict with this other science that we have. In the last 10 years, the science has taught us that young brains don't even have the capacity to make decisions like that. And in fact, even in Florida, they recognized this and overturned capital punishment sentences. Because of this brain science that we've gotten, it's allowed attorneys to go into court and say, science says this brain can't do that, so you can't execute. This is the liberal bastion gone too far. And how this happened is, it's from this liberal perspective of people have civil liberties and they should not be hospitalized against their will. Who's going to disagree with that? Well, you'll disagree with it when it's your 13 or 14-year-old who's, licking the wall or having visions or doing heroin. Displayed this girl.
You got your shirt on. Yeah. So speaking of roses, what's going on? So you have one of the most beautiful gardens I've ever seen. It's inspired me to create our space. And you've just done so much with it.
It is my sanctuary. It is one of the few spaces and things that I start working on where my mind just like goes into a meditative place where it's extremely relaxing for me.
Where do we need to go as a people?
Away. The planet would appreciate it. The environment has shown its amazing capacity to quickly restore itself. Scientists always say it's rejuvenating like way faster than we ever thought it would.
That we would need to drastically change how we transport ourselves, how things are produced, how we eat.
I mean, I think the pandemic has been one of the best illustrations in terms of how we as a human species, particularly in this country, are going to respond to a loss of control of our environment. This is just a little appetizer.
Is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't that you would like to say?
You discover one of your parents murdered someone before you were born. They were never caught for this crime. They have clearly shown remorse. Would you turn them in?
Do I have to answer the question, or are we just sharing the game question?
There was a question mark at the end of that sentence.
I feel like my initial response is no, I would not turn them in. That's my knee-jerk response.
So long as they got you everything that you wanted for every birthday. I would answer that as depends on who they killed. But you know what? I promise you this, I would shame them. Shame on you, shame on you, shame on all of you.